Our second reading today comes from 2 Corinthians, and I was really tempted to just say, let's just read this whole chapter and not do anything else. Because there's a lot going on when this little selection comes out. This is one of those places we can tell that Paul was a real human being with very real struggles and very real problems. One of the churches he was working with was starting to go a little left to center and really pushing on him and what he thought the direction should be going. And he kind of comes to a point in his frustration. And he shares something that almost is more an outburst than anything else. And we're actually going to look at the outburst. But it's interesting to note the rest of the context. He is frustrated. He wants to see the church growing and healthy. He wants to see no one pushed outside the doors or there being a distinction within the church. And so he shares this. If I wish to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will be speaking the truth. Yet I refrain from it, so that no one think me better than what is seen of me or heard from me. Even considering the exceptional character of the revelations. Therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore I am content with weaknesses, with insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities, for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. I think it's time to oil those back doors. Squeak. Like I said, our culture often wants Superman, and even goes as far as to tell us that it's attainable. If you get just the right magical combination, you will be perfect. If you get the right number of letters after your name, if you get the right amount in your savings or bank account, if you get the right house with the right fence with 2.3 children, you'll be fine. I've always been scared about a 0.3 child. What does that look like? Ew. But I've never seen it. It doesn't matter if you're a basketball store with millions, or Bill Gates, or even a local teacher, or a homeless individual. No one seems to be able to be Superman. No one is beyond problems. All of us have some time that we have to spend in the wilderness. Now we're almost through our time of Lent and our focus on this wilderness theme. We've talked about how in the time of wilderness this can be a place for learning, a time of challenge, a time of learning dependence. And last week we talked about how it can be a time of doubt and how that's okay. So this week, our companion text of the gospel helps us see how this can be a time of comfort. And yet it talks about thorns. Comfort and thorns. Something's not quite right here. Well, part of the reason this passage came up is when I think about wilderness, Think about those experiences. What animals pop in your mind? For me, one of the first things that comes to mind is a coyote. Because you know those movies, the cliches, and they're off in the wilderness, and somewhere you hear a coyote howl. Whether or not, by nature, they're actually there. But when I think about the plants of wilderness, tumbleweeds, come on, doesn't that come up a perfect image? And cacti. Can you imagine being around a cacti, sitting with it for 40 days, looking at it and thinking, can I possibly eat that? And getting one in your hand. If you've ever been stuck by a cacti, you know how painful that really is. They look kind of soft and fuzzy from the edge, but believe me, they're not. And whether it's a cactus or a rose bush or whatever else, I'm going to guess that at some point in your life, you have had a thorn in your hand, or maybe in your foot. Did anybody enjoy the experience? We should talk. To say that thorns are unpleasant is probably a bit of an understatement. Thorns really hurt. That's part of the purpose on the plant. It's no big surprise that when we get caught by a thorn, one of our first and very urgent reactions is, get it out. Normally at some very high decibel. Get it out, get it out, get it out now. We want that source of pain to be gone. We want to feel better. We are sure that life will be back to normal and everything will be perfect once that little sliver of pain is removed from our fingers. We've all been there. So with that experience in mind, of thorns, of slivers, or other things like that, let us think and focus again about Paul's experience. He shares that he has a thorn of the flesh. That is, that somehow he hurts. And unlike a normal thorn, he can't remove it himself. It's beyond his ability to get tweezers and take out whatever's hurting him. Historians have guessed that this thorn of Paul was everything from cancer to a tumor to, I've read someplace, diverticulitis, which I'm wondering how they figured that out. But whatever it was, it hurt him a lot. Have you felt like that before? Something hurt you and you couldn't make it go away. And you wished and you wished and you wished. Sometimes that's something like physical pain. But sometimes it can also be emotional. It's very easy to feel that level of emotional pain if you've ever been abandoned or ignored. And you wish the pain would stop. And you just can't make it. So it's no surprising that Paul, faced with this level and this frustration, that he prayed to God. Over and over, in fact, he prayed to God. And he said very simply, get rid of this thorn. Lord, I don't want to hurt anymore. Like I said, we can all imagine these experiences. Hurts that are pervasive in our life that we would really like to be without. That is a very normal, human experience. And there is nothing wrong with that, let me tell you, about saying, God, this hurts, please help me with this. And yet, let us hear what happens to Paul. God said to me, he wrote, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. He had to kind of wonder the first time he heard that, he didn't say, "Is there someone else I can talk to? Can I get a second opinion?" For we talk about every prayer being answered in the life of faith. But sometimes prayer isn't answered in the ways that we expect or intend. Almost every time we lift someone up in prayer, we know what we hope happens. And sometimes the answer is over here. I'm sure Paul was expecting healing, or at least some measure of relief from his pain. And yet what he received was the lesson that there is a power in his weakness and his infirmity. And that is God's power. And that there is comfort in this. Not the comfort from the relief of this thorn or the removal of this problem in our life, but rather the knowledge that God will be with us and God's power will work through all thorns, all problems. It might hurt to be in the wilderness. It might be uncomfortable to be on the bare ground. I know at one point in time I thought camping in a tent sounded like fun. Now I like mattresses. So the idea of sleeping on a rocky ground just makes me hurt from one end to the other. So I know those times happen. But I know God is with me throughout it. Whether I sleep on this rock, or I hug that cacti, or tomorrow my car breaks down, or I lose my pet, or whatever else happens in my wilderness, I know God is with me throughout all the thorns. When we ask God to work with our condition, through our strengths as well as our weaknesses, God's will can be done through us. Let us ask God for His will to comfort us in our thorns in this coming week. Because this is such a challenging passage, I'm going to read it to you again, but this time from the Message. Because sometimes it's helpful to hear it just a little bit different. And see if this ever sounds like your life, because it sounds like mine. If I had a mind to brag a little, I could probably do it without looking ridiculous. And I'd still be speaking the plain truth all the way. But I'll spare you. I don't want anyone imagining me anything other than the fool you'd encounter if you saw me on the street or you heard me talk. Like I said, that's me. Because of the extravagance of those revelations, and so I wouldn't get a big head, I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in constant touch with my limitations. The evil one's angel did the best to get me down, and he did in fact push me to my knees. No danger then of walking around all high and mighty. At first, I didn't think of it as a gift, and I begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that. And then God told me, my grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weakness. And once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the handicap and I began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in my weakness. And now I take limitations in stride and with good cheer. These limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition. I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become. Friends, Let's be strong in Christ.